was interesting that the name of the event here is Organic Connections, because my connections with Canadian farmers and researchers really has been a major impact on my life. It has impacted in a very positive way the way I farm. Certainly, it has had an impact on this business that three friends and I started in 1987, Timeless Seeds, certified organic pulse crops. And also it has been an impact on my personal life and a long list of Canadian farmers, friends, and business associates that I've had over the past 20 or 30 years up here. Bernie Enos sitting here in front, Ian Cushion was here the first day. The list goes on and on. There's probably 15 or 20 farmers that I've known and been inspired by over the years. So it's great to kind of come full circle and come back. Just to name a few of the other people, Dr. Al Slinkard from the Saskatchewan Crop Development Center. In the early 70s, basically you guys stole him from us. He was at, I think, University of Idaho, Idaho State, and they wouldn't give him tenure down there, so Ag Canada brought him up here, put him on the Indian Head Station, and it was there that he developed layered lentils, which we still grow. I'm sure lots of you in here grow, and developed other varieties. And from south of the border, anyway, we pretty much consider Al as being the person who, in a very significant way, changed the course of Canadian agriculture, and he certainly did that for me. It was through Al that I learned about this incredible symbiosis between, bacteria and plants, sort of two totally different organisms kind of collaborating for the benefit of both. Following that, there was Dr. Jill Clapperton at the Research Center in Lethbridge. My farm is about 2 hours south of Lethbridge, an hour south of the Coutts border. And Jill is a rhizoecologist, which some of you may well know. At that time, and it's still that time actually in Montana, we don't have a rhizoecologist in our whole ag system down in Montana. And Liz, what do I keep saying Liz? She looks a little bit like Liz Carlisle, actually. Anyway, Jill welcomed the organic farmers who she came to know up there. And she was really, key, I think, in helping a number of us, back in the day, understand this incredible web of life that exists under the soil, and what we've heard in the last 2 days here, time and time again. I noticed that Neil Strayer is in your gallery of heroes over there. Jill invited Neil and I to kind of sit on her informal advisory council to advise her research. And this is way back in the late 80s and early 90s. So it was great to be a part of that. Just north of here, Lipton, Saskatchewan, Richard Banky, a conventional farmer that had a seed operation on his place. In the late 80s, he introduced me to French green lentils, and that is still one of the most important lentils that we grow and market. And it was really the French green lentil that introduced me to the incredible opportunity that's out there for pulse crops in the food industry. Prior to that, we were just mostly growing green manure crops, Al Slinkard's Indian Head lentil, and others. And it was really the French green lentil that was opened the door for us to appreciate and understand the fact that a lot of people eat lentils. Not in Montana, definitely not in the 80s, but it was a French green that really kind of, opened the door for us in many, many ways. I should also mention Lizbeth Dwyer, our first organic inspector, once we moved the seed cleaning operation off my farm and into this little town of Conrad. So I've come to know both Lizbeth and Neil up at Manton Alberta quite well. So my own personal story, as Marla indicated, is in agriculture. I'm a third-generation Montana farmer, but my heritage goes back about 500 years to subsistence farmers in Norway. And then my grandparents, as probably the case for many of you here, emigrated to North America in just after the turn of the century in the early 1900s. You know, it's curious to note that at least part of the reason that they emigrated to the U.S. Or out of Norway, they probably didn't care too much where they went in some sense, was because of climate change. There was a 300-year period, basically from 1650 to about 1850, of what's called the Little Ice Age. And the climate cooled gradually over those 300 years. And it reached the point where glaciers were gobbling up farms in the Alps, crops were failing, and it became, you know, increasingly hard for farmers to make a living, even to feed their livestock. The invention of the bicycle, the precursor of the bicycle, was a device called the Dreisine, invented by Karl Dreiss in Germany. And it was invented, no pedals, just foot-powered, two-wheeled vehicle. It was invented to move the German troops because the horses were either slaughtered to eat or just basically ran out of oats. So it's kind of ironic that you know, climate change basically created the bicycle, and now lots of us ride a bicycle as maybe a bit of mitigation to the climate change we are currently experiencing. Then it was cooling, you know, now it's going the other way, but it's pretty amazing what can happen with, you know, 1/2 degree, 1 degree, degree and a half of Celsius on the average global temperature can have a tremendous impact on society at large, but particularly on how we farm. So grandparents moved back, farmed with horses after the prairies were broken up with these huge behemoth steam engines. So that 10,000 years of fertility that was built up in the prairies, you know, was all of a sudden revealed, exposed, if you will, and they farmed with horses, 1900 through the 1920s, and of course, you know, the farming practices contributed to a large degree to the Dust Bowl days of the 30s, which is when my parents started farming. When my dad bought the farm that I'm currently on, he bought it in 1939. The implement dealers in our area were taking horses in on trade. We're taking draft horses in on trade. So my dad literally took a team of 6 horses in one door of the tractor dealership and drove out a fossil fuel tractor out of the other door. You know, we talk about a metaphor for the move to industrial agriculture. There it was. The horses went to slaughter, you know, the tractors went to the field. As Marla mentioned, I moved back to the farm in 1976. You know, my dad, like all farmers, pretty much in those days, you know, was a conventional farmer and kind of increasingly tied into the industrial paradigm of you know, off-farm inputs. Started using a little nitrogen, you know, a little later had to use a little 2,4-D, and it just you know, kind of continued on until 1976 when I moved back to the farm and started converting it to organic to you know, kind of finish the well. And as Marla mentioned, in 1987 we started this business called Timeless Seeds. My own children moved off the farm as soon as they could. They're all millennials living in Minneapolis. You know, in a sense, that's kind of a very typical trajectory for us in rural U.S. and no doubt rural Canada as well. The irony of that is, however, that they can go down to their local food co-op. They can buy timeless natural food products on the shelf of that co-op. Okay, so to me, that's, you know, also kind of an indication of the development of the organic industry and the and the trajectory, I guess, of society. So I think it's can be said without a doubt that we've come a long, long ways in the last 30 years. When I first moved to the farm and started converting to organic, all the other farmers in the area were skeptical, and there were really only a handful of organic farmers in Montana. Now there's 1 million acres of organic farms in Saskatchewan. We have about 200,000 in Montana. I think there's approximately 4 million across the U.S. But it's no longer an invisible movement, I guess, at least. And of course, a local extension agent, our governmental farm advisor, rolled their eyes and just said it was unrealistic to do this on a field scale. And with one notable exception, at the land-grant university down at Montana State University, there was literally no researcher that would utter the O word back in the mid-'80s. And now, Organic Connections, there are organic researchers on the panel and doing really great work. And I really have to thank all the work that the Canadians are doing for organic agriculture. I think you definitely put a lot more focus, I think, and give a lot more credibility to organic farming than most research institutes in the U.S. do. It's changing for sure. Liz Carlisle was part of a group that did a mega analysis of the research dollars that are invested in organic agriculture, and I think she came up with something like 1 to 1.5% maybe of the USDA farm research budget goes to organic production. As was mentioned yesterday, just think what would have happened if, since World War II, if we'd invested even 50%, let alone 70 or 80% into organic farming. We'd be a long ways further down the road than we are now. But, we've come an awful long ways in 30 years. There's just no doubt about that. And I guess what comes to my mind often is that even though this really started out as an underground movement, just a handful of kind of back to the land folks and some natural food co-ops in some hole of the wall place in a few cities, it has really matured and come a long ways. The anthropologist Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world." And I think all of us sitting in this room are kind of evidence of that, actually, and we can be very proud of that. And now, it's a multi-billion dollar industry, and in some ways, we can say even though it's not status quo by any means. Only 1 or 2% of the farmers, in North America are certified organic, but it has kind of become mainstream in many segments of the society. So the name of the conference, Resilience in a Time of Change. When I first read the theme, I thought it was kind of an announcement, if you will, that organics is kind of the model for resilience, and a message, a method, a movement, a paradigm that we can take to the rest of society. And in a way, I think that's true. But on reading, at a second or third time, I thought, maybe it was more of a challenge, a charge. How do we bring resilience into organics? And I think there's kind of in a way it's two sides of the coin. If you haven't read this book, I'd actually recommend it. Laura Ling, Resilient Agriculture: Cultivating Food Systems for a Changing Climate. It's really quite well written, She makes a lot of great points, and it's also documented with lots of lots of research and article citations and so forth. But anyway, I'd kind of like to start with a few things out of her book. She notes that the word sustainable agriculture has really been part of the lexicon, in the U.S. at least, part of the official lexicon for about 20 years. The United States Department of Agriculture defines sustainable agriculture as a site-specific and integrated system, plant and animals, that will satisfy human food and fiber needs, enhance environmental quality, efficiently use non-renewable resources and on-farm resources, sustain economic viability of the farm, and I added the community, and enhance quality of life for farmers and society. And she divides that or kind of fills that out by noting that, there's really three dimensions of resilience. There's the economic side, there's the environmental side, and there's the social side. And all of these have been touched on a little bit over the last 2 days. Laura Ling talks about it as dimensions of sustainability, and to me, sustainability is kind of a noun. It's kind of a static thing, whereas resilience, even though it sort of literally is a noun, is really more of a verb. It's kind of always changing. It's always that change is going to happen, and resilience is how are we best able to adjust to that change. So I just kind of like to touch bases a little bit. I'm not giving any answers, believe me. These are kind of more questions and answers, more observations. But we'd just kind of like to touch a little bit in the next few minutes on these three. So the economic side, all of us are beneficiaries, obviously, of this tremendous organic market, the premiums that we enjoy, the growth of the market, and so forth. And that's in comparison to, kind of the industrial model of the economy. This is an infographic that probably everybody has seen. It's the seed industry structure in the in the conventional economy. You recognize all the big names, and of course, what has happened here in the past few months? DuPont and Dow, chemical companies who have major holdings in seed companies, have merged. That's about a $30 billion enterprise now. China National Chemical has just been approved to buy Syngenta, which is a Swiss company. That's a $43 billion acquisition. And then the one that's hit the news is the fact that Bayer is in the process of buying Monsanto, a $66 billion enterprise. And of course, what that has meant over the course of the decades is more and more control in the hands of fewer and fewer companies, and also fewer and fewer varieties being made available to those of us on the ground. And the beautiful part of the organic industry is that we have examples that maybe it doesn't have to be that way. Here's a few that I just picked out. Nature's Path, for the obvious reason, a great Canadian firm. PHS Organics, as well, kind of a cross-border enterprise. Bob's Red Mill down in the U.S. That is an employee-owned business now. And then there's Organic Valley, 1,800 members owning one company as a co-op. And I think while it's easy to get depressed sometimes, thinking about what's happening in the rest of the world, I think we can cheer on, we can support these and all the other companies that are in the trade show. Those all really have a very positive impact on our own lives and on the lives of many small and not so small communities across North America. This is a slide of the top 100 companies in the organic industry. It's a little tough to see, but you'd recognize, a lot of the organic brands. You would also recognize a lot of the companies who have bought those brands in the past 8 or 10 years. There's Hershey's in there. There's General Mills. There's PepsiCo, ConAgra, a big, concentrated feedlot and grain handling company. So on the economic resilience side, I think we do have to keep our eyes open, because what is happening in the conventional economy is also some degree happening in the organic economy as well. One thing that really particularly caught my eye is the one down here, and that is Flowers Foods bought Dave's Killer Bread. And I don't know if Dave's Killer Bread is on the grocery store shelves here. That's what it looks like. There's a kind of a small bakery in Portland, I don't know, maybe a dozen or so years ago. And now it's the #1 organic bread in North America. So Flowers Food also makes Wonder Bread. Okay, kind of the metaphor for everything that's wrong with the food system. Okay, and if you don't think it is, you can just read the label, and you can see wheat down there somewhere. There's 40 ingredients in that bread. Okay, so the question is, and Dr. Nichols talked about, sometimes you kind of take one step back so you can take 2 steps forward. This is not always a forward trajectory. But when I learned that Flowers Food bought Dave's Killer Bread for $275 million, I said, well, what is that? Is that good news or is that bad news? And in a sense, it's both, because Dave's Killer Bread buys 29 million pounds of organic wheat. Their website says it's in Montana. I suspect probably at least some of it comes from southern Alberta and Saskatchewan as well. And this bread is, made in a centralized facility, wrapped in plastic. Doesn't have preservatives, so it's frozen and shipped to about 9,000 locations around North America. Okay, I mean, it's great bread. It is. It's really good bread. Is it a symbol of resilience, for our industry? I think we can. I'll just leave that as an open question. Contrast that with Stella Moss in Bozeman, Montana. Okay, she hand makes sourdough bread. She makes 300 loaves a week. She has a bread CSA, so she delivers it to your door. It's not wrapped in plastic because it's made fresh. It's wrapped in a craft paper bag, which can be composted. It's made with sourdough, so it doesn't need preservatives. It'll last, it'll last on your counter for, 5-6 days a week until the next time she makes the bread. So we just kind of did a little math. Okay, so just an example. I'm not picking on Dave's Killer Bread, because it's an important part for many farmers in the northern Great Plains. But they buy 29 million pounds of grain, and they're in the website says they're in 9,000 locations. So my question is, what if there were 9,000 Stella's bakeries? How much wheat could they buy? Well, if they made 600 loaves a week rather than 300, they would also buy 9 million pounds of wheat annually. So there's more than one way, I guess, to think about the growth in this industry. And as we think about that, as we think, who we support, the bread we buy in the store. It's good to look at the alternatives, I think, and to think about resiliency. What's going to be good? The bad thing about, or at least one of them, about small companies being bought by big publicly held companies, that are traded on Wall Street, is that just as wheat and barley have become a commodity in the conventional world, companies can also become a commodity in the economic world. They can be bought, they can be sold, they can be traded. And what happens along the line, is sometimes okay and sometimes not so great. Okay, the second step in this, second dimension is the environmental dimension, environmental capital. And obviously, this is one area where organics really kind of stands tall in being a model for the rest of the world. There's something going on in Iowa called the water wars. The city of Iowa has sued 3 rural counties in Iowa. The city of Des Moines, Iowa, has sued 3 rural counties because it is now costing them $900 million a year, $900,000 a year to clean nitrates out of the water that is leaching out of the fields in the surrounding counties. Okay, and that's by and large that is synthetic fertilizer that is being applied. Probably at a too high, obviously at a too high a rate because it's leaching down and going into the water. This is not a model for resilience. This is a model. This is a model for a system falling apart, and the consequences of that, is not only the contamination of the natural resource, but it's the contamination of the relationship between the city people and the farm people. As Dr. Nichols said, there's an answer to this, and that is how we treat the soil and how we rebuild that resilience in the soil. We have billions and billions of workers in the soil that can solve that problem for Iowa and for the rest of us. The third piece is a social piece, and one of the speakers yesterday, Foster Warner, touched bases on this. Over the days, we've talked about the sustainability of the number of organisms in the soil. Wally Hamm talked about the sustainability of the amount of nutrients in the soil. Foster talked a little bit about the social aspect. It doesn't matter. In a way, it doesn't really matter how you farm, doesn't matter how much you farm, doesn't matter what you grow. If you sit down at the table at night and you or your family are miserable doing it. So the social aspect is really important. I'd just kind of like to step back, a little bit further from the table. There's a paper recently published in the Journal of Agroecology, Sustainable Food Systems. It was called, I have it up there. This isn't the exact name, but I've stolen a few of the key points because I think the author, Antoinette Dumont, really picked up on some key points about this dimension of resilience. Part of the aspects that she highlighted were to have a resilient society, we need vitality of the rural social fabric. It says 2 socials there, but there's probably only one. Anyway, it's important that the community works in rural America if farming is really going to be resilient. It's also sharing of experiential and scientific knowledge, which we saw in spades here yesterday. Farmers, researchers sitting at the same table, conversing across the table about what's working and what isn't working. And that's really something that I think the organic industry can provide as a paradigm. Community commitment to collective well-being. In other words, it's not just all about me. That we care about our neighbors, we care about our local communities, and that we, basically have a shared future together. Another piece is reinvesting the monetary profit back into social goals. So it's not just repaying, the return on investment is not just, is not just paying back the investors, paying back the bank. It's also investing in making the society better by sharing some of our financial wealth with those like Sask Organics and others who are just doing great work on a little bigger focus. And then finally, food security and food justice for all. I'm not really going to talk about this. Liz Carlisle is going to have a great session on this later, and anybody that has been asked the question or wondering about the question of can organics feed the world, I encourage you to sit in on that because there's a lot of good work being done in that area. So social resilience, I'll bring Stella back here because what she has is what she calls a community-supported bakery. And part of that is just the great bread that you get from Stella and the fact that it's fresh and the fact that she buys from local Montana wheat and grain producers. But it's also the fact that you get to know Stella. Stella is kind of the best part of this organization, or the best part of this enterprise. To have Stella show up at your door, once a week, really would, add to the quality of life of her customers. And she knows what they need, and she bakes what they need, and she delivers what they ask for. She's basically building community. Another example of this, Doug and Anna Crabtree, sitting here in the front row, professionals that bought a farm half a dozen years ago or so, and organic farm just south of the Wild Horse border. I've done a great job, pollinator crops. They have 200 fields and grow a couple dozen different crops, so forth. But the other thing that they're trying to grow is land stewards. They have developed this program of an on-farm paid apprenticeship program where farmers can either come for 8 months in kind of an immersion course or more ideally a 2 or 3 year apprenticeship program where Doug and Anna will mentor these new young farmers, teach them the ropes, and in the best of all worlds would be able to actually help provide them land to farm. And it's even better if that land, would be adjacent to or neighboring Doug and Anna's farm, because that would be building, a true organic community from the ground up. They're looking for interns, by the way, and they're for the coming year. So feel free to talk to them or check out VelikasFarms.com on the website. There's some of their farm apprentices. So I moved back to farm in 1976. We were kind of entering a farm crisis at that time due to lots of factors, fertilizer prices, and rural health, and a farm program that said get bigger, get out, get bigger, get out. And my dad had an opportunity to buy the neighbor to the north and east of us at one point, and the neighbor to the west of us at the other point. And one of the things that really impressed me, even though my dad and I kind of disagreed on lots of things, as sons and dads always do, but some of Dad's acquaintances asked him, on the one farm, aren't you going to buy the Hammermeister place? I heard Louis was going out of business. Made some bad decisions. And then a few years later, the Wormsbecker place, an older gentleman who was retiring. Orville, aren't you going to buy the Wormsbecker place? And I distinctly remember my dad, basically giving the same reply in both cases. He said, I would rather have neighbors than have the neighbor's land. And, to me, that kind of captures, both the spirit and the beauty of building a resilient agriculture. Which is not to say we don't expand our farms, when it's the right thing to do. But the whole community aspect of the organic movement, has really been one of the high points of my life, being able to participate in that, being able to learn from others and to get to know people literally around the world, who all share the same basic vision and the same basic objective. It's not just lone cowboys out there, trying to make a difference. So I'd like to end by just by reading a little paragraph or two, actually, of the book, The Lentil Underground, which Marla referenced. This is toward the end of the book, and it's called "You Can't Do It Alone." So the book is, it's named The Lentil Underground. It's about a group of, it's called Renegade Farmers and the Future of Food in America. It's about a handful of folks in Montana who started growing organic lentils. That's the front story. Of course, it's a lot bigger story than that. I trust you can kind of, step back from the word lentil as I read through this. But much like a newly initiated legume farmer, I want to think that lentils are a straightforward substitute for synthetic fertilizer, a cheaper, more environmentally benign alternative. And to some extent, this is true. But if that was really all there was to it, there would be no Lentil Underground, just a smattering of savvy growers rationally applying plant-based nitrogen instead of expensive ammonium nitrate. But the fact is that biological fertility is more than just a different nutrient management approach. It is an entirely different way of life, one in which time and space broaden considerably and the illusion of control falls apart. Building your soil biologically is not a precise prescription for a particular crop, but a contribution to a larger ecology, subject to independent variables, geologic time, and global biochemical cycles. You will not capture all the value on this farm in this year. You cannot individualize your return. To build biological fertility is to build community, to accept interdependence with other creatures and foster a common belief. This way of life cultivates a new kind of awareness, a new empathy. You have to pay attention beyond this homestead. You have to pay attention beyond this season. You cannot spray and forget about it and go to the lake. Planting organic lentils and all the other crops that go with them becomes a part of who you are, what you are conscious of, how you see the world. It forces you to listen more deeply, more expansively, and it softens, to some extent, the borders of the self. This is the great irony of the Lentil Underground, or perhaps its secret. What rugged individualism brought together, only community can sustain. Thank you.